This is Irene Woods. I am getting ready to work on the back on the size 3X Fairisle mid-gauge round yoke cardigan. The pattern does not show short row shaping on the back. It is an option, and you can certainly do that. And I prefer to have some. I think it fits better if there's a little short row shaping on all of the pieces. You definitely need it on the front. I am going to add it on the back and sleeves as well. So what I've done at this point is keep 6 stitches in work position. All the rest are in hold. The carriage is on the left side of the bed. I'm going to increase 1 stitch on the edge, and then set the carriage for hold, which means push both rustle levers back. Knit 1 row across, and then we're going to wrap this first holding stitch. I prefer to use the transfer tool. You can certainly use your fingers, but I seem to control it better if I have the tool in my hands. Okay, knit back to the left. Okay, 6 more back to work position. Now I'm only taking them back about halfway on the bed. There are little indentations on these bars between the stitches, and that's approximately where you want to put those needles. Increase on the edge. Knit 1 row, wrap the yarn under the first holding stitch and back to the left. 6 more back to work position. Technically this is upper work position. Make an increase on the edge, knit across, wrap, and knit back. Six more back. Knit 1 row to the right, wrap the yarn under the first holding stitch and back to the left. 1 more time. 6 stitches back to upper work position. And increase on the edge. Knit back to the left. There's a drop stitch, and we're going to have to deal with that. It's one of the reasons we don't ever take the waste yarn off until we get past this, because this does sometimes happen. There's waste yarn in there and then 1 row of ravel cord, and that will prevent these stitches from running any farther. If you only have just a few rows, in this case it looks to be 4, you can usually get them picked back up like so. Slide everything behind the latch, Pick up the bottom bar and knit it through. Pick up the next bar and knit it through. Pick up the next bar, knit it through, and then pick up the last one. If it runs down a long ways, you will really have to use the latch tool and work from behind the fabric. But in this case, we could get it all back on. That is the end of the short rows. What we need to do now is make an increase on the edge. And then cut the yarn. Put all of the stitches into hold position. Whoops. And take your carriage across. As long as both rustle levers are in the back position, you won't drop stitches. Now I need to reposition the camera because I don't have enough room to get all of this on camera. Okay, the carriage is now on the right side of the bed, and we are going to do exactly the same thing on this side. I'm going to start by actually putting the stitches in the hook for this first row. Usually you can get away with just pushing them back halfway, but sometimes I drop stitches when I'm first getting started, and I don't want to take a chance on that. So, hang the weights. And make an increase on the edge. Knit across and wrap the first stitch. Six more back to upper work position, knit across, wrap the first stitch. Knit back to the edge. Make an increase. Six more into work position. Knit across, wrap, and back to the edge. Six more back to work position. And back to the edge. Make your increase. Six more back. And this will be the last short row. So knit across. Now, at this point, we're just going to make the increases on the edge. Yeah, we already did one there. So make the increase. Pull the rest of the levers forward, and the holding needles will knit back in. So knit 2 rows. Now, according to the pattern, I need to make a total of 7 increases on the edge. And this would be the 6th one. You're not going to be able to see what I'm doing on the left side of the bed. I'll see if I can reposition the camera a little bit, but it's not going to get all the way across. Knit 2 rows. Increase on both sides. Knit 2 rows. That was the last increase row, so now we need to cast on 11 stitches on each side. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. It's easier for me when there's that many stitches to unthread the carriage. You wrap the needles and then put it back in. Knit across to the left and cast on 11 over there. That just completed all of the raglan shaping, and we are at the base of the armhole. Set the row counter back to 0. It's a little bit difficult to get the weights on the cast on area, and you actually may not be able to, not for a couple of rows. So what I usually do is pull out all of those end needles. That just helps the carriage knit. I'm going to do that for 2 rows. Now at this point, I'll be able to get the weights all the way out to the end. According to the pattern, we need 94 rows until we get to the ribbing. So I'm going to do that, and then I'll be back. I'm now at row count 94, and it's time to begin working on ribbing. These are long needles. The bottom one, you can get both of these on Amazon actually. The top one is an upholstery needle. It's a 6-inch long upholstery needle. And the bottom one is currently being made by Susan Bates, and it's called a steel weaving needle. It's 5 inches long. I want to show you how I use these. When we're knitting ribbing from the top down, it has a tendency for the stitches sometimes to get away from you and run back up into the body of the garment, which we don't want to do. So I have cut a length of heavy crochet thread. This is what's frequently called bedspread weight cotton. And I also sometimes use pearl cotton. Oh, this was a big cone of it. It's a number 5 pearl cotton. I usually use this weight on a standard gauge machine. because it's just slightly thinner than the cotton that I have put in this long needle. But both of them you would use exactly the same way. I also prefer that 6-inch upholstery needle when I'm working on a standard gauge bed because the needle shaft is a little bit thinner. What I'm going to do is just sew down, up, down, up, down, up. This is a lifeline. Hand knitters use them a lot. Machine knitters tend to more use waste yarn. Well, I don't want to take this off on waste yarn and then rehang it. I just think that's a step. It doesn't have to be done. But I do take the time to run a lifeline through these live stitches. Because that way, if I should drop a stitch and it runs, it can only run down this far. I know this takes another minute or two, but if you've ever had to pick up a whole lot of drop stitches or given up in despair and just simply taken the whole thing off and put it back on the bed, you will definitely understand the value of a lifeline. Okay, I'm going to do this all the way across and then I'll be back. The lifeline is now in all the way across. I should mention that if you don't have a long needle, you can certainly put in a lifeline with the regular needle that was packed with your machine, a blunt yarn needle. Just weave it in and out of every other stitch like you saw me do with the long needle. The object is to have this lifeline going through every stitch. That way, if you should happen to drop one when you're working on the ribbing, it cannot run down farther than this line. Going to begin ribbing at this point, and I'm going to turn the tension dial down. In this case, just one number, because I don't really want the bottom edge to pull in. So I had been knitting at tension 7. I'm going to go down to 6. According to the pattern, I need 14 rows. So I'm going to knit that, and then I'll be back. I now have 14 rows knitted above the waist yarn. I'm going to bind off using the stitch through stitch method. So I need to turn the tension dial up. I'm going to go all the way up to 9. Knit one row. Now drop the second stitch all the way down. This is woolies, and it's got just enough wool in it that it wants to stick together slightly. And wools tend to do that more than acrylics. Okay, now at this point, we need to decide, do you want to run it all the way to the row that has the lifeline, or do you want to end one row above it? It doesn't matter, but once you start, be consistent because it shows. I'm going all the way to the lifeline. The first column, and sometimes the second column on the edge, can be a little bit difficult. So take it slowly, make sure you get every bar. It does get better and it does get faster once you get in from the edge. Okay, I want to illustrate what happens if we just give this a good sharp tug. And I need to move the camera slightly. I'm going to just give this a real sharp tug. And if that lifeline had not been there, this would have continued all the way down here. But because that cord is through every stitch, it can't do that. What I'm doing is pulling down with quite a bit of pressure with my left hand so that it keeps this ladder opened up. And when I latch back up, I'm really not turning the latch tool up and down or sideways very much at all. Mostly I'm just keeping it in a straight line. One of the classes I did at a seminar, we talked about that. And one of the ladies said, think of your arm as a piston. And it just simply goes in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. It does not move around. It does not move up and down. All you're doing is going in and out. And I thought, you know, that really explains what's happening, because basically that is. I'm not moving my wrist. I'm just simply, basically, the whole movement is coming from my shoulder. And it's just forward, back, forward, back, forward, back, forward, back, forward, back. And I think if you can learn to develop that rhythm, you'll really pick up speed. The tendency when we first begin to work on ribbing is to do it this way. When we first begin, we tend to do it like this. One stitch, and then go through there, and then pick up the next stitch, and then go through. And then pick up the next stitch and go through. And yes, that works, and you will get a very nice seam. But look how much faster this is. It does take some practice, and I would suggest start on a sample and not on your garment, but it is a case of a little bit of practice will bring this in. So in and out, all the way up. And the trick is keeping that ladder opened up with your left hand and keeping the fabric taut. I think you've seen enough of that, so I'm going to finish it up off camera, and then I'll be back. I've just finished all of the ribbing, and at this point I'm going to pull out the lifeline. I prefer to do that now because if I have split a stitch somewhere, and particularly right down at the row that the lifeline goes through. So I pulled out the lifeline, and I'm just double checking. I'd rather fix it now before binding off. And I don't see any. So I'm going to use the stitch through stitch method. Some people have you go through the purl stitches from the front like so, and the knit stitches from the back. Quite honestly, I can't tell that it makes enough difference. And for me, it's just faster to pick them off this way. Another thing some people have you do is bring all the needles forward. Let's just do a few, like this. And then pick off the stitches and through, basically in one motion. I used to be able to do that without much problem, but I have rheumatoid arthritis, and I also don't have much feeling in my hands anymore, which means I don't have very good control of my hands anymore. And this method usually results in what I just did. So I don't do it this way any longer. I have better control to keep the stitches in the hook, pinch directly below where I'm working, and take them off one at a time. I'm not going to tell you either method is better than the other. They both work, and so I would encourage you to try it both ways. Now, we've bound off so many times in other videos, I'm not going to show any more of this. I'm going to do it all off camera in the interest of saving time. I've finished the ribbing and bound it off. And this is what we have. I want to show you the part of the cardigan that is just below the yoke. This is the bound off edge. And this section right here, see if I can hold it up a little bit. This section right here is where I worked the short rows, right across in here. Now I want to emphasize you do not have to put those short rows in if you don't want to. The pattern is written without them. This is a tutorial pattern meant for somebody new to knitting yokes. And when we first started doing this, one of the things several people mentioned was they just weren't comfortable doing short rowing. So I only included it on the front neck. That is a part that I really think you should have it on. It does affect the fit quite a little bit. I'm having a little bit of problem pulling out the ravel cord. And this isn't true ravel cord. It is number 5 pearl cotton, which is very strong, and I use it because it's disposable. It only costs just a fraction of a cent to use it, and then you can just throw it away. So this is just going to go in the trash. Now let's peel off the waste yarn and check to make sure that there are no drop stitches. And if you have watched my previous video on the green bulky pullover, you know that there are little bumpy jags. Well, there still are here too. I haven't pulled anything into shape at all yet, so you can barely see them. There's one here. There's one here. There's one here, and one here. And that's where the short rows are. What we did was knit from here to here, reverse and go back. Knit from here to here, reverse and go back. Knit from here to here, reverse and go back. And so each time the carriage turns, there's a little stitch right there that shows. There's a little stitch right there that shows. But it doesn't show very much using this method. And I did talk about this in that bulky series, that if we had done a couple of rows of solid color and then put in the short rows, it moved those bumpy stitches down into the solid area, and they don't show very much. What I should have done on that green sweater is knit at least one row, and probably 2 rows would even be better, of the dark green across all stitches, and then begin the short rows. For this sweater, this worked out well. It has not been blocked. I hadn't even pulled it into shape yet, so that's what I'm doing now. And almost all of this will disappear. And what doesn't will definitely disappear with a little bit of blocking. And this is what we have. So this is our yoke with the short row shaping.